prepping the guitar for pore filler on the mahogany. So that means masking off everything that is not mahogany. Start with the fretboard. And this one is ready for the pore filler. I go over the whole thing with a fine-tooth comb with a microscope just to make sure everything's perfect, because this is really the end of the prep, and there's no going back. I mean, well, you could go back, but it's a whole huge lot of work if you have to redo it after the pore filler. So yeah, it's in perfect shape and it's ready to go. As far as the pore filler goes, I've mixed up my own concoction, and here we go. I mixed my pore filler so that it's about the consistency of, I guess a little heavier than something like mayonnaise, right? That way it sticks in the pores and doesn't wash out when you remove the excess. Try to brush it in across the grain. All right, that's that. Now, some people at this stage will squeegee it off, and you can do that. Let's try it. That's good, it just gets the excess off. And now for the rest of it, I'm going to use burlap. So the first place I'm going to go for is the control, the control cavity cover routes, because it builds up on the inside there. I want to get it out of there. That's good. And from here, I can start to work this out now. Try and go across the grain or in a kind of a circular motion like this as much as possible. I'm going to be spraying Mohawk piano lacquer. This is a nitrocellulose lacquer, but with a very high solids content. I love this stuff because it builds fast, it dries fast, cures fast, and it's got that nitro look and feel. And I'm going to spray with my Iwata LPH 80 gun. This is a beautiful gun. The good people at Iwata gave this to me, along with a Supernova gun, in return for plugging it if I liked it, which I am happy to do because I do love this gun. I'm going to scuff sand the entire guitar. I'm going to use 220 grit sandpaper, which is quite aggressive, but this is just a scuff sanding. So I'm not going to go crazy. What I'm doing is I'm just knocking off high spots and dust specks, that kind of thing. I've got the gun set to 10 psi at the gun. Here I've got a pressure regulator right here. And you know, that's a very low pressure. It's a soft spray, so there's not a lot of blowback. I mean, this is HVLP, and so there's not a lot of blowback off of the surface that I'm spraying. It's very different looking than putting dye shader in the clear lacquer. I love the hue of this. So that's it for today. I've got 3 coats on today, plus 2 coats on the other day. That's 5 coats in total now. And I think when I come back, we're going to be ready for coloring the top and doing burst, and also the face of the headstock. We need to seal that and then get it painted black. The nice thing about nitro lacquer is that it's very forgiving on a gun. If it's any kind of a catalyzed finish, like an automotive urethane, then you have to clean the gun. You've got to break the gun down completely and clean every little crevice of it, because if that stuff dries in your gun's shot. But since lacquer will always remelt with thinner, we're really safe that way. But still, I'm going to give it a pretty thorough cleaning. So first thing I do is I'm going to take a paper towel and hold it up against the nozzle and spray. So what this does is it produces a back pressure which the lacquer, this thinner is wanting to spray out, but it's being prevented from spraying out. So it's getting back washed into all of the components inside of the head. And actually, if I do it here, you can see, right? I'm just going to pull the trigger until all of that thinner is gone, and put the gun away. And that's it for today. This is Mohawk piano lacquer. It's nitro lacquer, and I've got it in a clear gallon jug, and it sits out in the sun. This is going to be a naturally aged ambered lacquer. It really is the best way to do it, because you don't have the artificial, putting dye in it, it always looks phony to me. And then when it actually does age years down the road, then it looks really goofy. So yeah, this is what we're going to use as our kind of our final amber color coats before the last clear coats. So the old ghetto blaster in the shop has finally given up the ghost. So I went on Kijiji today, and look what I picked up for the new shop stereo. Woohoo! Big ass Kenwood speakers and a tuner circa 1979. Sounds great. Yeah, the shop is going to be rocking. So let's see, what did I do today? Last thing we did, I had 5 or 6 coats of clear over top of the backs and necks of the guitar. And I decided that I wanted to even out the color a little bit, so I just shot a coat of clear with some tinted red aniline dye in the clear. And yeah, that's looking really good. Even things out. Let's see what this guy looks like in the paint booth. Time to put the first coat of clear on the tops. So this has been all sanded. First I sanded it with 220 grit paper, and then I took a damp rag and went over the whole top with a damp rag, and then sanded it back with 320 grit sandpaper to knock off all the fibers that the water raised up. So it's ready to go. I installed some masking tape here in the tailpiece studs. Same with here at the truss rod nut. And I'm going to clear this as well. I'm going to clear the headstock face as well. Oh yeah, so exciting to finally get a coat of lacquer on that top after all this time. This is when we're going to really see the tops start to pop. And this is only the first coat. I mean, once we get it built up enough so that it's, you know, really smooth, and we've got stain color in the lacquer, it's just going to explode. It'll look awesome. I just scuff sanded the clear coat on the top and the headstock with some 320 grit sandpaper, and we're going to put another coat on today, another 2 coats actually. And look at my lacquer. It is getting noticeably darker, more of that lovely honey amber color, and we're just going to keep, I'm going to keep darkening it, leave it out in the sun until it gets as dark as possible. Second coat of clear on this top. Alright, that's it for today's work. I put 3 coats of clear, 3 more coats of clear on the tops and also the peg head faces. And so now we have enough build to, when we come back, we'll do the bursts and paint the headstocks black. So today we're going to spray the coat of yellow on the top. Yellow aniline dye dissolved in methyl hydrate. This is the stuff from Luthier's Mercantile International. And oh, I'm going to put one of these spoons in. What's this? 5 milliliters. You have to adjust the taste for your own mix. If you mix this stuff yourself, how strong you mix it, you can pretty much have to experiment. I'm going to add a little more. 5.5, 7.5. Alright. And now one last thing, we're going to add a little thinner to it, because this is just a color coat. I don't really need a lot of build from this. So I'm going to add a precise scientific measurement, about that much. Even without the grain is popping. We're going to do one more coat of the yellow. We'll have 2 coats on there, just to give it extra depth. Second coat of yellow on Tim's. We're going to shoot the burst today. So we've got, the last thing we did here was put the coats of yellow on the top. So now that we've got into color, this is our first bit of color. No matter what you do, do not be tempted to sand it. If you see any kind of a little dust fleck or anything like that, avoid the temptation to sand it, because you cannot sand a color coat. You will burn through, you'll change the color, and you'll see it immediately. So if you can take a look at how yellow these things are, they're like super duper yellow, and that's cool, because we can always mellow it out later with you know, amber coats, that kind of thing. Even just a natural ambering of the lacquer will mellow it out with time. But in order to get the brightness in the middle of the flames to pop, we need this to be a really bright yellow. Alright, now we are going to mix up our burst color. let's do it. I've got a mixture of about 50-50 or maybe 60-40, 60% nitro, 40% thinner in here. So it's really cut because I don't want the burst colors to have build. I just want them to be color. That way it reduces the amount of ridge on the binding once we scrape the binding. This is probably about a 75 milliliter cup. I'm going to add, maybe 5% color. And I'm using a mixture that I made up of alcohol-based aniline dye. Same thing I sprayed on the back neck of the guitar. So this is mostly red, tiny bit of blue, and a tiny bit of brown, all aniline stains. Now for spraying the burst, I changed the settings of my gun from where they are when I'm actually just laying on coats of clear or whatnot. What I want is a fine atomization so that the gradient of the burst is almost seamless. It just is a smooth gradient from the center color, which will be yellow, to the outside edge. If the atomization is not fine enough, then what happens is you see tiny little droplets, especially with an HVLP gun like this. So what I do is I'm turning this air pressure up to about 17 psi here at the gun, and then I'm turning the output down. So I'm getting a lot of air pressure, but not a lot of paint coming out. I don't want a lot of paint coming out because you want to be able to control the sunburst. The sunburst is done in multiple passes. That way you can control the depth and the width of the burst. You don't want to do it in 1 or 2 passes. You'll end up with a clown burst if your dye is that heavy. You just want to do a little at a time. You don't want to go in too far. I'm looking to put a wet coat of the red color, maybe about 3/4 of an inch onto the edge. And then as I approach this area, I pull the gun back so that the wider fan will hit this area. Otherwise you might get a stripy effect here and here, same thing. Alright, I'm going to let that set up for a minute or two, and we'll do another pass at it. And we're going to do the same thing again. I'm not going to go any wider because what I want to do is I want to build the edges up to be the darkest at the very edge, and then as it goes in, all you have to do is just keep spraying, and the overspray will naturally bring it in, and you'll get your color all the way in. Here we go, second pass of the burst. Not quite there yet, it's still quite orangey. Okay, here we go, third pass. This time I'm going to go in towards the center a little bit more, maybe a ½ inch or so. But I'm keeping the pass light because I want the gradient to be smooth. I don't want a hard line of color. So that's it for this one. As you can see, it's a really bold red, deep red burst. But in fact, in the end, this one is going to be a faded burst. That's why I'm using the alcohol soluble aniline dye, the red aniline dye, because it will fade with UV light, and eventually it's going to end up looking like an old 59, like an iced tea burst, I guess they'd call it. Yeah, that's going to take some time in the sun to achieve that effect. That's why I went, you know, a little heavier on the red, and I made it a little bit wider. I made the burst, the gradient, like the most of the burst is in the first inch here, but the gradient comes out softly a little further than you would want it to look like in the end. But this gradient is going to almost disappear when it starts to fade because it's on there very light. So we're going to end up with just the edge being a darker, kind of a dirty color. Sort of an amberish, orangey, dirty color. It's going to be beautiful. Okay, the bursts are done. And now I'm going to lock it all in with clear coat. Now you might be tempted when you see this kind of thing here. This is the dry overspray. Don't touch it as far as, you know, it's all pebbly and rough feeling. You might be tempted to sand it off or something like that, but do not touch it because this is part of the gradient that will change the color. Once you hit it with clear lacquer, this is going to melt all this pebbly stuff, and it will become nice and shiny like everything else. All right, we're going to scrape the bindings. So this is the guitar fresh out of the burst session, and you can see here the top is painted right over the binding. So what I'm going to use is a scraper blade, and this is a fairly heavy scraper blade. The reason why I want to use a heavy one rather than something like, say, a razor blade is because if it's too thin, as you pull it along, it'll chatter. It'll skip and chatter if it's like a thin razor blade. So use something heavy like this, and we're going to just wrap some tape around it, around the end, and create a custom depth stop to accommodate the width of this binding. We want to be just slightly shallower than the actual depth of the binding, but that's cool. The last thing we want is to go deeper than the binding and uncover the wood. That'll be perfect. Okay, so now I'm just going to keep wrapping this around, making sure that it lands in exactly the same spot every time, until it builds up enough so that it's a good, reliable depth stop. Now this is a down and dirty way to do it. If I wanted to get creative, I could probably simply make a simple depth stop out of, I don't know, let's say a piece of aluminum with a saw cut down the middle, say like a little block of aluminum, saw cut down the middle to insert the blade, and then drill and tap a hole on one side for a set screw, and that way I can just slide it along and set it anywhere I want. Matter of fact, I think that I'm going to do that next time. This is kind of a one-shot deal. If you screw up scraping the binding, you're in a world of hurt. There's nothing you can do to fix it short of stripping the finish and starting from square one. We don't want to do that. Let's give it a test swipe. Yeah, this is going to be just fine. I'm going to apply the serial number stamp on the back of the headstock. And for that, I've got this nifty little kit that I got from my Les Paul forum member Frank, aka Pine FD. This thing works really well. They're little polymer numbers, I guess they're polymer. And we just stick them to this block, the numbers that we want, and then onto an ink pad, and then pressed onto the headstock. So we're just looking at the final coat that I sprayed on this guitar, and I just want to show you how fantastic this finish can be. This is the Iwata LPH80 gun. I mean, it's almost ready for polishing. There's very little orange peel. This is like glass, which is great. So I'm only going to have to sand with, I don't know, I think I'll start with 1500 grit paper and see if that takes out the little amount of texture and orange peel there is, and we'll put it on the buffing wheel after that. Alright, here's a picture of one of the guitars. This is the one that's going to get faded sort of halfway. One of the guitars won't get faded at all. This one will get faded halfway, and the other one, the third one, is going to get faded a lot. But I'm going to show you this one. So what I've done is I've put all the hardware on so that when it does fade in the UV, everything under the pick guard and the pickup rings, that kind of thing, will leave its telltale mark that it has not faded under those parts. So let's leave it out in the sun for a bit and come back and take a look at what it looks like. And here she is after fading in the sun. You can see the fade marks under the pick guard, a little bit under the pots, the knobs I mean. Oh yeah.